And welcome back to Saturday Agenda. As always, we close with our third opinion. This week, we're talking about despair on Main Street in America. 2020 has been a brutal year for vast swaths of our society. The pandemic has robbed many American families of the one thing that has helped define our existence for centuries: the dignity of work. In 1968, Martin Luther King Jr. famously said, "Whenever you are engaged in work, that serves humanity. It has dignity and it has worth. And one day our society must come to see this." Well, more than 50 years later, that sentiment remains as important today as it was then. Tens of millions of working American families were forced to sit at home in the early days of this COVID crisis, often for the first time in years. They were assured their furloughs and layoffs would be temporary. So they tolerated the bureaucrats dragging their feet to get them the support they deserved. They watched helplessly via Zoom as friends and loved ones were buried at funerals they were prevented from attending. They limited their visits with grandparents to FaceTime, and they transformed their living rooms into classrooms so that they could homeschool their children via virtual learning. Bit by bit, little by little, they surrendered the frayed fragments of their humanity in service of what they were told was the greater good. Well, today that sacrifice has not yet been repaid. It has not been repaid for the man who now reports to his local deli each morning not for a job, but to be first in line to use the bathroom because the water in his home has been cut off. His household is now one of 12 million in America, where water insecurity is at its highest point in the midst of a global pandemic that thrives on deficient hygiene. That sacrifice has not been repaid for the family that typically helps serve the hungry during Thanksgiving, but has found itself on a food line this year. They join the 40% of families who say this pandemic is the first time they have ever found themselves in need of food. And that sacrifice has not been repaid for the family that no longer has access to a checking account because they were overdrawn for 60 consecutive days, so the bank automatically shut it down. They join the growing list of American households that are too poor to bank and drowning in a nightmare of excessive financial fees. These are the families that did the right thing. They prided themselves on getting up every single morning to do the unseen work all across this great nation. And yet they have been sidelined and in many cases mocked. They're mad, and I don't blame them. How can you not be mad at a government that tells you that gathering for your faith or your family is against the law, but those who illegally seize public property and declare autonomous zones face zero consequences? You see, it's easy to reduce our divisions to the frustrations of a contested election. But this simmering rage and the palpable sense of fear is much more complex than just our tribal politics. It is anger at the loss of the opportunity to dream. It is fear of the possibility that their job loss may in fact be permanent. And it is the sobering sadness at the prospect that the dignity that has always sustained them may in fact have been sacrificed in vain. In the literary classic East of Eden, Nobel Prize winner John Steinbeck wrote, "You can only understand people if you feel them in yourself." Well, if we wish to be a nation worthy of the sacrifices made by millions of Americans, then we need to work with the fierce urgency of now to give them the support that they in fact have earned in their moment of need. We need to act as if the children at the food pantry are our children, and as if the water insecure family at the public restroom is our family. If not, the anger will only continue to fester, the pain will only continue to grow, and our moral failure will dwarf any of the scientific blunders we have made along the way.
You just watched Newsmax TV, America's fastest growing cable news channel, now in more than 70 million homes. You can get Newsmax TV on your cable system or check your cable guide. And if your system doesn't carry Newsmax, call them, tell them you want Newsmax TV, because we're real news for real people.